joined us on this. We're happy that you're here, and at the end, I hope there's time for you to share where you're tuning in from. Always good to know how far our reach goes. My name is Neely Verano. I'm the consulting gallery director for Elder Gallery of Contemporary Art here in Charlotte, and I will start by talking a little bit about Elder and what we do. And then I will share a few housekeeping items. I have to admit that I woke up with a bit of fear and trepidation this morning because I am very technologically challenged, and thankfully I have a great team here who's supporting, but hopefully nothing will happen. So during the course of this talk. And then I will introduce David, and I'll talk a little bit about David, but of course we want to hear from him directly. So again, welcome and thanks again for being here. So Elder Gallery of Contemporary Art is located in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are one of the longest standing and very proudly longest standing galleries in the region. We represent both emerging and established artists who work in a range of aesthetics, of course, including ceramics and glass. We are dedicated to offering intellectual and creative stimulation through both our exhibitions as well as our programming. And our ethos and our vision really is around creating a meaningful space and place for artists and for our community to have important social discourse and dialogue around some of the most pressing issues, not only here in our community, but more broadly across the US. We have been named Best Art Gallery for 3 years in a row by Charlotte Magazine, and fingers crossed, and please send good vibes that this will be the 4th year that we're named Charlotte's Best Art Gallery. And we've been recognized in a number of media outlets for our innovative and forward-thinking programming, including in the New York Times. So you can find more information about Elder Gallery at our website, which is eldergalleryclt.com. And I will also put that in the chat so that you have that. And I'll also leave my contact information as well as our teams. If you have any questions or want to reach out personally, we'd love to hear from you. So before I introduce David, a few housekeeping items. Like I said, you can put any questions in the chat, not only related to Elder in general, but also as David is talking. You are welcome to put a question in the chat at any time, and I will try to find a spot graciously in his presentation where I can interrupt him and ask him the question. If you are having trouble with your Zoom, check your settings, but we're also happy to provide support if something's not working on your end. So just oftentimes I find that my Zoom settings get off somehow. So hopefully nobody has technical difficulties, but we will try to assist you if you do. And then make sure that you're muted. I think everyone is muted here, but that will prevent us from having any interference during the course of David's talk. And the last thing I should mention is there will be time, hopefully at the end, for question and answers as well. So if you have a burning question that cannot wait throughout the talk, feel free to send it in the chat, but we will also open it up for discussion and Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Patchen. Hopefully some of you have had the chance to do a little bit of homework on David, but for those of you who are not familiar with David, he's a self-taught artist, which is pretty remarkable considering sort of his trajectory and his artistic career, which he's going to talk about. He is one of those people who I think, found his calling, worked in corporate America for a long time, and decided to leave corporate America and begin designing glass art. And as I said, he will share more about that story. He was born and raised in New York, but now resides in San Francisco, which is arguably one of the best places to be if you're a glass artist. He has a private studio at Public Glass in San Francisco, which is a really well-known center for glass art. He is also, he uses pretty complex Venetian techniques, which he's going to talk about today, as well as Kane and Marini. And I think David is going to be walking us through how he uses those materials and doing a short demonstration. So I'm really excited about that. But David is someone who has really adapted a unique and interesting process, and the results, which hopefully you can see a couple of his sculptures, his glass sculptures behind me, are just incredibly remarkable in terms of the use of color and form and shape. So I'm excited to hear more about David's process today. He is collected in all over the world in both private as well as public and corporate collections. He has works in Elton John's collection, as well as Jack Welch and Herb Kelleher. So we feel very fortunate to work with David, and the depth and breadth of his talent is really astounding. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to David. And David, if I missed anything in terms of your bio, please mention that now, but I'll let you take it away. And thanks again, everybody, for being here.
Great. Well, thank you, Neely. And thanks to Elder for hosting this. It's always good fun. And I'm going to share my screen and take you through some slides. Let's see. It says host has disabled participant screen sharing. So I think that's on your end. Neely, your first technical challenge. Oh, now you're muted.
I just said we're on it. I'm sorry. Hopefully this is the worst of it.
Well, in the meantime, I will take you guys through a set of slides that give a little bit of background on me and my transition into glass and how I learned, as well as kind of an overview of the different series that I make, a bit about kind of inspiration, because everyone always asks about that, and then a whole bunch of the process. So obviously, on Zoom from our guest room as opposed to in the studio, I decided that the virtual demo would be done with images and video from my Instagram. So I use Instagram a lot in the studio, and I'm followed by a zillion glass artists, and we're actually really well networked on social media, which is super fun. But a lot of process shots I just shoot for fun. Oh, here we go. While I'm in the studio blowing glass. So let's see. Here we go. So my work is, if you're at all familiar with my work, you know that it's like heavy duty about pattern and color. And that's really what I think about. I'm not as focused on form. There are amazing things you can do with glass as far as, blowing it into really intricate shapes. But because I'm so focused on pattern, I think in pattern, and I want the forms that I use really to just be kind of canvases, three-dimensional canvases to show off the compositions and the pattern. And a long time ago, when I was first getting started, a gallerist said to me, your work has lots of little visual stories. And I thought that was really an apt way to kind of think about, the way I design a piece, because it's all very, very intentional. The relationships between the patterns, the relationships between the colors, none of this is store-bought and just assembled. All of this is very much, built with a vision in my head, and composed as a mosaic on a ceramic plate. And then it's heated up and picked up, and we roll it onto a pipe and we blow it. And I'll show you some of that a little bit later. But these are some of the patterns that I've played with in the past year or so. This one doesn't really look like a pattern, but if you look really closely, it was an experiment as to see how many little tiny white threads I could get in a piece. And I estimated this one had about 560,000. And so when I think about glass and when I go into the studio, it really is an exercise in relationships, in transparency, and relationships with pattern and color fields, etc. Let's see, why is the next slide not loading? Oh, here we go. So I've also played around a lot with glow in the dark glass. So I have a friend in Virginia who makes this very, very special glass. You can't just buy it on Amazon, and it glows in the dark. So I end up adding it to some of my pieces, and it's become something that I've kind of become known for. I don't like to use it as a, I don't know, like a visual trick. I like to just incorporate it in the pieces so that they stand on their own like this. There's a white grid, but then, you happen to turn out the lights and it does that, which I think is pretty fun and just like an added dimension. So as far as my background, like Neely said, I grew up in New York. I was there till just before I was 16. And then our family moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, which was traumatic to say the least for a high schooler. And from there, I stayed in Arizona for college. I got a business degree. I was, headed into the business world. Little did I know that I would discover glass some 20 years later. But then I lived in LA for a while, and I worked at ad agencies, eventually made my way up to Silicon Valley, and I worked in Silicon Valley and around San Francisco for a number of years, probably around 16 or so, until one weekend I went to an art fair, and I saw that there was a studio there that offered glass blowing demonstrations and classes. And I said, what the heck, this is just so interesting to me, this idea of glass as a liquid. And I took a beginning glass blowing class there. And that was kind of the beginning of a hobby, which turned into a real, kind of obsessive passion. And then I eventually transitioned out of technology. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. So a little while ago, we moved outside the city. We lived in the city for 17 years or so. I have a wife and a second grader and a third grader, and we moved about 12 minutes over the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin, which makes my commute really nice because I get to drive over the Golden Gate Bridge every day I go to the studio, but it also makes it kind of long, which is a bit of a bummer. But anyway, so this is the coast. We're standing at the beach. But like I said before, I was in the Microsoft world for about 8 years, but other startups and Yahoo and eBay and all over the place, in consumer as well as enterprise technology. And the way all of this kind of went from the corporate world to glass was, like I said, in about 2001, I took this glass blowing class, and I found there was a friend of a friend who was also a glass blower, and you're a beginner for kind of a long time. And you always work in teams of two, because it just makes life so much easier than trying to do this thing solo. So I started working with this friend of a friend who became a very good buddy of mine. And we would blow glass in the evenings and the weekends, because this is all pre-kids and pre-wife, et cetera. And I decided I loved it so much that I decided to take some time off from the corporate world. And I was also really into scuba diving and travel. And I decided I was just going to take what I was calling the Summer of Dave. And so the Summer of Dave involved trips to Europe and a lot of scuba diving. And also I decided I was going to get good at glass blowing. And I'd been making all sorts of stuff and, filled up my parents' house with giveaways. But eventually, I got kind of decent at it. And I realized that I loved selling it. It blew me away that people were interested in my creations enough to buy them. So I started working with some small craft galleries. And then when it came time to go back to work, I decided that I didn't want to work full time because I was loving glass so much. And by the way, the Summer of Dave actually was during the .com bust. So it turned into like the year and a half of Dave. So I had a good long time to, practice glass before I decided my savings were depleted enough. I needed to go back into the corporate world. But I went back and I just worked 30 hours a week. And then over about 11 years or so, I just ramped it down. And at the same time, I ramped glass up and built it, into a relationship with lots of galleries and a business that could support me. So when my son was born, about 9 years ago, I went just full-time glass. So as far as inspiration, I don't really have any direct inspiration that I can draw from. It's not like I study the figure, or, I model my work after anything. It's really just, I don't know, it's either some combination of whole cloth or riffing off of pieces that I've made in the past, but looking at them and saying, oh, wow, I wonder if I swapped that purple for gold, or I wonder if I made larger dots instead of that. So they're really iterative. But I think what goes into my subconscious is probably a lot from scuba diving. This is me with a large cuttlefish. When I started diving, initially I was kind of apprehensive about the whole thing. It was, it's kind of a wild experience. But once I got comfortable, I ended up making a dive buddy friend who was a professional underwater photographer. And so I started diving with a camera. And so these are some shots I took, but like, these are the things that would stick in my head. So I assume that the things that would stick in my head probably provide some subconscious, inspiration. These are a combination of sea slugs and worms, and they're really quite small, about this big. Most of them are even smaller. But I love the colors that they have. And there was one point, probably about 12 years ago, where I felt like I had figured out how to control glass, and so I could make the forms that I wanted, but I was really stuck as far as color choices. I didn't like the colors I was using. And I realized that, I have no formal arts education. And so I decided I needed to think about color theory, and I bought a bunch of color theory books, but I also bought a book all about nudibranchs, which is what 3 of the 4 of these are, because I thought their colors were so amazing. And so for a little while, I felt like I flipped through there to find color relationships that I liked, because I tend to like secondary colors and not primary so much. These are asparagus that I got from Whole Foods, and I was like, oh, that looks really cool. I think I'm going to make some glass with a fade like that. So that's the kind of thing that inspires me, is just like stuff I see in my everyday life. This was a shot off the coast of Indonesia, and it was just, I love the detail and the textures in this. So it was a photograph that kind of stayed with me, became my desktop for a little while. The fluidity of glass is also something that I love to play with. And, the way you can make these little fine threads kind of move suspended in a clear matrix. It reminded me kind of this worm that is on the seafloor somewhere in, I think, Papua New Guinea. And as far as the series, the what I call the series of my work, which are really identified by forms, I'll just go through them really quickly. This is called folio. Someone actually corrected me and told me that it should be called folia, because it's in reference to a leaf, but it's a form that's evolved over time. And I make a lot of work like this. They're very flat. They're probably only about this deep. These are called Parabola, and I call them that because I first started playing with kind of these curved forms, and I tried squatting them down. I tried pulling them long, and it was just all about playing with that curve and what I found aesthetically pleasing. These are ellipse, and they started out as spheres. And I decided that I didn't like the sphere quite as much, because you had to like move around it to see all of the different patterns. So I started flattening them, and I really like them just as a very, very simple canvas. These are called bloom, and these are, pure sculpture, not derived at all from any kind of a vessel. And they're pretty good sized. I don't really know how I came up with this, but a lot of these things I may experiment a little bit in clay, but then I will start to blow pieces and just see how they feel to me. And originally these were vertically oriented, and they didn't have quite an organic tail, and they kind of evolved over time. And I love orchids, and so I think that there's probably some orchid influence here, and probably some sea creature influence here. But I couldn't really tell you the process that I used to come up with, this work. So these are called Piscine. That's interesting. It's getting cut off the screen, but this came about really pragmatically. I was working with a gallery in San Francisco, and they said, a lot of your work is quite tall, and we live in earthquake country. Can you do something that's kind of low, something that would be a nice centerpiece? And so I started thinking, and I'm sure diving was like floating around in the back of my head, because I came up with this before we had kids, and I was still able to just jet off on dive trips. So these are fish shaped. They're quite narrow, and I envisioned them kind of as trios. So like groups of fish as centerpieces. So I make them in all sorts of different patterns. The sphere that evolved into the ellipse, I still make spheres occasionally. And then this is called Dewdrops, which is a real departure for me. And it also had kind of a quirky origin. Maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I got a commission from a corporation to make an award. And at that time I was still consulting, and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of fun. And the award had 3 of these crescent forms and a sphere. And so once I was done with the project, I had some of these experimental pieces left around, these random crescents, and I started putting them together with spheres that I also had left there. And I kind of liked the composition, and I realized, oh, this kind of looks like dew on, you know, reeds or grass or something like that. And I like playing with the positive and negative spaces. And I put it on my website, and lo and behold, I got a commission for 8 of them for a cruise ship. And one of the really fun things that I did just before the pandemic was an assistant and I flew out to the north coast of Germany on a cruise ship that was just being outfitted, and I installed 8 of these in some of the restaurants there. And I've done a whole bunch of other ones for other clients. I generally just do them as custom pieces, but they're really good fun. They go about 4 feet tall and as wide as you'd like. This is Resistenza. It's a very early form that I started playing with, probably a little more classically Italian. And it's a flattened kind of bottle form, but also, you know, something that I thought was, at the time when I started making these, it's fun to pull long necks, and I like the elegance of the form, and I also like the fact that it's flat and wide and gave me a pretty simple canvas to play with pattern. So this is interesting. So I've done a number of collaborations with different artists, and it usually happens through, you know, social media or meeting someone at a conference or a party. And, you know, because I mentioned earlier that in the glass world is pretty well connected on Facebook and Instagram. I feel like I know like 90% of the professional glass blowers in the world, and we've either traded messages or liked each other's work or chatted a little bit. And one of those glass artists whose work I really liked is a guy named James Devereux, who hopefully is on this Zoom, because I'm going to ask him to pipe in a minute. But James and I think first started chatting through Instagram, and then we went to a Glass Art Society conference. And they're conferences that move around to different cities, usually glass centers. Every year they're at a different place. And so there was a really amazing one in, I think it was 2018 in Murano. And so James and I met up in person for the first time in 2018 in Murano. And he said, hey, well, you know, the next time I'm in the States, it would be fun to do some kind of a collaboration. And I thought, oh, that would be really fun to explore. So in 2019, he was teaching up at Pilchuck Glass School, and he made his way down to San Francisco afterwards, and we worked in the hot shop together, and we combined some of my patterns with his forms. And so this is a form that called Quillen that James has come up with. And what you can't really see here is there's a beautifully chipped edge across the top. And then here is something called Clovis. And if James is on, he can talk a little more about the origin of these. But this is also a piece, obviously, with my Marini patterns, and then James's form. And we've made a handful of these during the pandemic. I wasn't able to fly over there, which would have been super great fun, but I am able to make these patterns in San Francisco and form them kind of into like a cup shape. And then I ship them over to James in the UK, and James heats them back up to 1,000 degrees. And then he does his magic and makes these pieces.
I am here.
And there he is. And there's James. So do you want to talk a little bit about these collaborations from England?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's great to be on. It's been interesting trying to get connected, and I've managed to secure the corner of a small whiskey bar in Bath, which have let me in before they even opened, just to let me get on this call with you. So yeah, I'm thankful to those guys. But yeah, if you can see my background right now, I'm covered. There's beer barrels and whiskey barrels behind me, and it's yeah, very interesting. But yeah, as like David was saying, I think this collaboration has come through a mutual respect to start with. I find collaborations can be tricky because they can fall too far one way or the other. And I think David and I have managed to hit a nice little sweet spot here with, the patterns, which are very, very obviously David's, and hopefully the shapes and that keeping with a lot of sort of my more traditional forms and the works that I've spent years developing. The patterns and things are something that I've never really explored in my work. So being able to work with another artist that can do that has been great fun. And I think actually the pandemic has probably really helped us, hasn't it, David? Actually been able to do these things remotely. I have no idea what David's going to send me cup or pattern wise and colors, and then to be able to respond to them when I get them with no input from David on whether we make them into the tall Clovis shapes or the shorter quillen shapes. It's been really, really fun to be able to respond to what we have as a collaboration. I think if we were to do these in the same hot shop, which hopefully we will be doing at Gas, you'd inevitably have some kind of influence or some kind of response from each other. And it's been amazing to be able to work in the way that we have, and it's continued. I'm thankful for David for wanting to keep going with it, and it's certainly been huge amounts of fun for me.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention, he and I, James and I joined a talk that we had last, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And I noted that it was really like maybe the third time that we'd spoken live in, I don't know, 2 years or something, right? We go back and forth a lot with text and a little bit of email. But like James said, like we kind of specialize in our areas. So it's fun. It's been a kind of a magical combination. And we have about 7 more of these in the works right now in all different patterns and colors that they're already made. And I think James is having them photographed by the end of the month. So
yeah, I'm just finishing off the bases at the moment. So they'll be off to the photographer later on. And I think from that as well, for the first time of doing these together at Public Glass and doing one, and then you sending over a couple of cups and evolving to do a larger batch of 7 this time round is, like anything with glassmaking, you gradually get into a swing of things, doing them over an amount of time. So it's been nice to let the pieces evolve, and it'll be nice to see them as a whole grouping rather than individuals. Groupings and collections are very prominent in my work, so being able to do them as a whole collection has been really interesting.
Oh, and these are also, a lot of these are between 2.5 and 3 feet, or even some taller than 3 feet tall. These are pretty sizable pieces.
Yeah, I think that the last ones we made were 98 centimeters tall. So you're looking at over 3 foot.
James, we have a question in the chat actually. By cups, do you mean stuffed cups?
Yeah, we don't tend to use stuffed cup terminology in the UK too much. We'll use it as cup casing. But yeah, basically, David will send me a smaller embryo, which isn't made into a cup yet because it's cheaper to ship. And then I will pick those up. I gather over them. So I have an outer casing of clear glass, which again helps with the optics on the bottom of the pieces. I then blow them into a larger cup, and then they're stuffed cup solid. So they are solid forms. They're filled with solid glass inside and then made out. And from a technical point of view, I don't know how many other glass people or people with glass terminology are on the call, but making something in the US, which is using a different base glass with potentially 2 other different kinds of color manufacturers in it, shipped over here, I'm then making these large solid sculptures in a different base glass. It's quite incredible to see the flexibility of a material that we're able to put all of these different glasses together, whereas every glassmaker knows you can just have one wrong thing in there and you've completely ruined the whole batch. So the fact that we're able to even just materially work in this way is quite amazing.
Don't jinx it.
No, well, all right.
Okay, this has become inside glass. But yeah, James is right. I'm always nervous. Are all the glasses going to work together? From a technical standpoint. But we've managed to make it work. I dare say 100% of the time. So
there's always a failure somewhere. So otherwise it wouldn't be glass, would it?
Exactly. That's how it works. All right.
We call those beautiful mistakes is what we call them. So
yeah, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
exactly.
I'm gonna log off because I do have to get off. But say it's nice to join in. It's nice to see you, David. We'll catch up soon. And yeah, I hope the rest of the talk goes well.
All right. Thanks a lot, James. Thanks for joining.
Cheers, buddy.
All right. See you later. So that was, everyone got to sit in on a little artist update.
David,
so,
we did have another question, if you don't mind my jumping in before you
sure.
move to your next slide. We had a question. Have you participated in the Blown Away series on Netflix?
I have not, but I have quite a few friends that have been on. And I don't think it's for me for a whole host of reasons. The primary one is that, you know, I've got this young family and I don't think they'd like me being away for up to 2 months while this thing is shot.
Right.
Yeah. And quite honestly, you know, I love making my work and I don't seek the I don't know, notoriety that would come with being on that show. But it's a really good fun show. If anyone hasn't seen it, check it out. I think it's on Netflix. It's a glassblowing reality show. And yeah, in fact, one of my a guy who's assisted me a whole bunch of times was on it. Jason, it was on the last season, Jason McDonald. Anyway. Great. So I'm going to go through a bit about how it's made. And in some ways, this is better than being in the studio. In some ways, it's worse. But it's better in that you don't have to sit through all the reheats and all the boring stuff to get to like the highlights of, you know, where there are transformative moments. Because there really is, glassblowing is kind of like, you know, they're critical timing and everything's got to be done in a certain way. And then actually we wait while we let something cool down before we can gather on it, or we wait while it reheats, or, you know, so it's kind of slow and fast at the same time. So this will be more just fast. So all of my work starts out with something called cane. Now cane is our rods of glass. And I think there's a picture of some cane here. Let's see, just so you get a reference. So here are rods of glass. And this is how we make it. We layer color. So glass blowers get color in either rod form, which is just these long rods of concentrated color, or you can also get it in frit, which is kind of like gravel. And you can buy it in, you know, gravel all the way down to tiny little small pieces that are like sand or even powder. And you can incorporate that color into your clear glass. And that's how we get colored glasses. We start with clear. We have at our studio, we've got 600 pounds of molten clear glass in the furnace. And we gather it out and we incorporate color to it. So I incorporate color using the rods, because I like to work with the concentrated glass, because I'm going to stretch this, I don't know, 50, 60 feet to form these long rods. So here's a video my assistant took. I've got a massive glass there. It's white in the center and then some kind of color around the outside. I can't tell what color. It all looks orange when it's really, really hot, by the way. That's a really long-running childish joke, is why are we always making orange glass? But with the minute this cools, it'll be blue or purple or red or whatever it is. And it will become this stuff. And so this is how I get the threads. This is how glass blowers get stripes. And so I'll pull the cane in whatever colors I would like to use. And then I can incorporate it to make Marini. And so this is how I incorporate it. So right here, I'm making, so Marini are the little cross sections that you can see that pattern all of my work, like here and here. So the Marini are made by either layering hot glass or rolling up rods onto a massive glass, which is what's happening here, and then heating all of that so it homogenizes, and then we pull it and stretch it. And then after it's cooled, you can cut it into little slices. And just like a sushi roll, you know, the pattern is in the cross section. That's exactly what this is like. So here's the pulling of this. And this is quite tricky to do. The glass needs to be really, really uniformly hot so that when you pull it, it doesn't just, either kind of spaghetti into a pile on the floor, or it doesn't just lock up and not stretch at all because the center's cold. So it has to be done when the glass is like a really, really uniform kind of flexible heat. And there are a lot of things that influence the way this glass stretches. And without getting into the crazy gory details, different glass colors move at different rates when they're molten. So glassblowers will talk about a glass being soft or a glass being stiff. And what that refers to is the soft glass gets very, very soft and liquidy at a given temperature. And a stiff glass really doesn't move or blow at all at a given temperature. So initially, when you're a beginner, this becomes very, very challenging to combine different colors that have these different properties when they're blown, because your blue will stretch out and your white won't move because your white is stiff. But the better you get, the more you can start to combine colors that move differently, because you're accustomed to it, but you can also gauge how they'll move. And now I'm able to use it in a way that I can put these glasses next to each other and create effects where one stretches more than the other, and they're desirable effects. So you can play with the optics that way, because a soft glass will go concave and a stiff glass will stay convex. And so you can create lenses in pieces, which is really fun to do. So here is Marini being cut, right? After it's cold, it's annealed, it's been in a kiln overnight, it's room temperature, and I have an assistant who cuts it on a wet saw, the same thing that you'd cut tile on. So it's a blade that has diamond embedded in it, and it cuts the glass really quite easily. Then this is a ceramic plate, and so when I decide that I'm gonna make a piece, I start laying out this Marini, and here's like just a time lapse of me laying out the Marini for a piece. And so I will spend way longer than it takes to blow these things, filling these big plates. They're about 20 inches wide, maybe about 15 inches tall, and I'll fill them with a pattern. And sometimes that pattern is random, like here. I think I turned the camera off before I filled it all the way. But sometimes that pattern is random, and other times that pattern, has kind of intricate ways that the cane moves, around patterns and things like that. And these can take me, a couple of days to do. And I say a couple of days because I can only work on it for maybe 3 hours at a time, before my neck hurts from just like leaning over this plate and moving all of these hundreds of Marini around. So I'll work on them over a period of days, and then when we decide to blow them, they'll go in a kiln and they'll heat up to about 1,000 degrees. And from 1,000 degrees, we can take them into a reheat furnace, which glassblowers call a glory hole. Don't ask me where that name came from. But it goes into the glory hole and we squeeze it. I think I have a video of squeezing. Anyway, this is the piece that this video was making. We blew it into this. So I filled the plate, and when we squeeze them together, all of those little round pieces bump into each other and they fill the voids in the corners. And so it gets this kind of cellular like structure. And here you can see the blue and the green are very soft colors and the white is not. So the blue and the green forms these really cool concave lenses. And if you look closely into it, you get to see like the entire piece. It's really cool effect. So here's an entire piece laid out that's not a random pattern. And so this piece gets blown. Here's a quick video. So this is all on my Instagram. If you want to see a lot of like in the studio stuff, feel free to look me up on Instagram. So this piece got blown into this. So I don't want to get all super technical on you, but you'll see these blue pieces. All those blue patterns are at the very top left side, and we put it on the blowpipe, and then we transfer it to another blowpipe to make them in the middle of the piece. It's called switching the axis. So here's squeezing up a Marini pattern after it's hot. I use these long sword-like things that I made in Italian. Most of our tools have Italian names because that's where glass blowing was really, really matured. I mean, it started in, I think, Mesopotamia, but the Italians started doing it on a large scale and really, really refined it. And this technique was popularized in Murano, this technique of using these little tiles called Marini. But anyway, this is, you know, heating it up and squeezing it. And I mentioned those tools that I made. I do this on a pretty large scale. And so I either have custom tools made or I make the tools myself, because there aren't just that many people in the world who need these tools, right? That, you know, not that many glass blowers and not that many glass blowers using this technique on a large scale. So there are a lot of tools that I will make. And this is switching the axis right here, right? I've blown a bubble and I'm putting a blob of hot glass that I'm going to pick through. And then we're going to attach a new blowpipe on that hole. And then that pattern where it all comes together, that's going to be on the front of the piece as opposed to the bottom of the piece. This is gathering. I've mentioned this a couple of times and James mentioned this as well. So after we have that pattern on the pipe, there's not that much of it. It's really, you know, it's only the size of a softball or so, and you can't make a big piece of glass out of that. And this is the way almost all glass is made, all blown glass is made, is that you dip it in clear glass to build up the mass, the bulk, so that you can blow it into something much larger. So this is what it looks like when we gather on a piece, or we'll say dip on it. So what I'm in is the furnace, and there's a giant 600-pound crucible I mentioned of clear glass in there. And so I've just encased the piece by dipping it in this, it's like a lake of fire in there. And so the glass is about the consistency of honey. And so we encase it. And now I'll hand this off to my assistant, and then we'll shape it and let it cool down a little bit. And then we'll start to inflate it. But right before we inflate it, this glass is probably 3 inches thick. But that will enable me to make something that is, you know, 20 inches tall, et cetera, with this very, very small pattern. So it all gets stretched. And if you ever feel the inside of pieces, you will see that you can feel the pattern, because the pattern's on the very, very inside of the bubble.
David, sorry to interrupt you. Going back a little bit to the beginning part of your process, we had a question. What makes one glass soft or stiff?
You know, so I'm not a glass chemist, but basically the colors are made just like ceramic glazes. They're made from metal oxides. And so when you take a base glass, a clear glass, and you add something like cobalt oxide, that makes a blue glass. And if you add copper oxide, you can make, depending upon the copper oxide, you can make a green glass, or iron oxide, or selenium, and all of these colorants, these metal oxides, not only affect the color of the glass, but they also affect the way the glass behaves and its melting temperature. So every glass formula behaves a tiny bit differently. And some of the colorants have a more profound effect on the way the glass moves and its melting temperature than others. And so it really just depends on the color recipe. But there are a lot of other technical quirks when you start adding color to glass, because it also affects the way the glass heats up and cools, how it moves. And that can create technical issues like James was talking about. When two glasses do not contract at the same rate when they're cooled, the glass might not, it might crack. So there are a lot of technical issues in combining different colors.
Sure. We also had more of a comment, at least from my time at Corning, and I might be wrong, but I learned that the term glory hole comes from those rays of sunlight that peek through the clouds, and people used to refer to them like the glory of God, and the reheating chambers kind of resemble that.
Ooh, okay. Excellent. I like that one.
I do too.
Cool.
Pretty cool.
So this, let's see, getting back to this slide here. This is the answer to how do you flatten the glass. So here my assistant has a piece that is really nicely evenly heated, and I'm blowing a little bit of compressed air on the neck so it's not too floppy when we squish it with cork paddles. So those are paddles just made out of really thick cork. And you can see that the ashes of the burning cork kind of coming off of it. And if we do this when it's at the right temperature, it just kind of squishes. My assistant's capping the pipe so that it doesn't collapse entirely and it gets wider. And that's how we flatten things. It's really pretty quick and simple. This is, I don't have a good video of this, but this is So after a piece is formed, you'll see the bottom is at the end, kind of near where my hand is holding the tool. That's the bottom there. But we need to break it off and form the top. And so what we do is a move that is really high stress when you first start working with glass. It's referred to as transferring. So we're moving it from one pipe to another. So on the left side, it's connected to the blowpipe. And on the right side, that's my assistant actually, has brought something called a punty. And the punty is just a long steel rod, and it's got a bit of precisely shaped glass on the end. And he'll attach it to the bottom of the piece. And we wait for it to cool down enough so that it's not so flexible that it won't support the weight of the piece. And then I put a little water on the neckline, right where the piece joins the pipe on the left, and we break it off, and then I can form the top. And when I form the top, here's kind of what happens. I put a glove on because this glass is probably 1700 degrees or so when it's flexible enough for me to pull the points. Here's pulling the points on a folio. But you use tools to form the glass and shape it however you'd like. And that's the end. This is kind of similar to the piece that was just on the pipe, but you can see how those are the points that I pull. And the punty is still attached to the bottom when it comes out of the kiln. Usually it takes about 2 days to cool down, and then we grind the punty connection off and make it perfectly flat, and then it goes out to wherever it's going to go. And happy to take some more questions. Kind of ran through this kind of quickly. If you're interested in seeing, for example, like how a bloom is made, the Corning Museum of Glass, when I was visiting artists there, has a video of me making a bloom. And it's really nice that it's on YouTube because you can put it in like 2x speed and you can watch the whole thing in, I think, half an hour or so. But that involves a stuffed cup, which was a question that came earlier.
So I welcome people to unmute themselves if you have a question, but feel free if you're more comfortable to also put your question in the chat. Either way is fine. We do have one question from Diane. You anneal the punty on the piece?
No, actually, so once the piece is formed to the shape that I like, we let it cool down slightly while it's on the punty. We want the heat to be really even, but the glass not to be flexible anymore. And then we put a little bit of water on the punty, and then I hit it with the tweezers really hard. And that little bit of water creates a stress fracture. And then the hit with the tweezer allows it to break off the punty and into my assistant's hands. And he wears Kevlar gloves, and then he rushes it off to an annealing oven. And then it cools down over, I don't know, around 26 hours or so. So it breaks right off on the punty.
Another question, other glass has the same color punts. Why do you not use the same color as the rest of the glass?
I'm not sure I understand that. The same color as the rest of the glass.
Let's see. Other glass has the same color punts. Why do you not use the same color as the rest of the glass? Maybe we'll ask Deborah to clarify that question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand.
Deborah, you're welcome to take yourself off mute if it's easier to just ask him.
Okay. Other glass blowers use, I have not seen where the glass is clear, the punt, that it's usually the same. They pull the glass so that the punt is the same color as the rest of the piece of glass. Why do you put a clear bottom on? And not
so my pieces all have, like a lot of glass, there's a clear layer on the very, very outside. And so I shape that into the foot. And so that makes my feet, beautifully clear, right? So you can see the foot of that piece. And then the punty that my assistant brings is also made of clear. So it's clear, it's a clear punty going on a clear bottom. And then that gets ground off. So the punty is clear, and the bottom of the piece is clear. I wouldn't want the punty to be anything other than the same glass that it's going to join, because anytime you add another bit to a piece of glass, if there's a coating of color there, it can create a weak spot. So I want that punty to be really robust. These pieces are, usually somewhere between 13, 16, 18 pounds. And on the end of a punty, that's a really great deal of weight. So I want the strongest connection I can. So
I'm
you know.
looking at a piece of Lino's that I have right now, and the base of the piece is from the shape of the glass. There is no clear. Is it because he does not put a clear coating over his glass, and you do?
Oh no, he puts clear coating over all of his work.
But his work, none of his work has a clear bottom.
Some of his does. I've seen a lot of the dinosaurs, any of the pieces that are sitting on a piece. But you know, it's really interesting. The optics of glass are such that unless you have a really big slug of clear on the bottom, the optics read as if there's no clear on the outside. And if you look closely at any of my pieces, aside from the bottom, it does not appear to have a layer of clear. It's just the optics of it. But if you go to YouTube and you Google, if you Google Lino and you watch any of his process, there are tons of videos of Lino blowing at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, but you'll see his assistants dip in clear glass for every piece they make. I've never seen him not do it. It's just that when the glass is blown a little bit thinner, then you don't see that layer of clear. He also, when he cold works things, you cannot see the layer of clear. But if you were to see a Lino piece broken, I guarantee you there's pattern and then thin clear.
I would not like to see a piece broken.
No, me neither.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Anyone else? Is there anyone on this call who has a work of David's that you would like to show the group? No pressure.
No pressure.
I think they're gorgeous. They're very Indian in the design. I mean, the colors, not the shape so much, but the colors.
Oh, interesting. I've also had people say certain of my pieces look African in nature. I've had people,
not American Indian, but Indian from India.
From India, yeah. I've also had folks, usually Australians, say that it looks Aboriginal because Aboriginal art uses that kind of a fine dot pattern in a lot of their work, which I thought is kind of interesting. I love seeing work in clients' homes. I always ask, anytime I deal directly with a client, I always ask them to send me a picture of it in their home because I love to see where they end up, and I also like to see what else is in people's collections.
I have David's dewdrops, and I think Sonia sent you a picture of it. I guess I got it, I don't know, 2020, 2021, but
oh, yeah.
I have your gorgeous dewdrops.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. Nice to hear from you, Sally.
David, I have a question. This is less of a technical question, but I'm always fascinated to hear about how people and artists who sort of dropped everything that they were doing to pursue their creative passions full time. Was there an aha moment for you when you were working in your marketing software career that was there something that pulled you toward this need to do this, or an aha moment? Can you talk a little bit about that and what that was like, the kind of bravery that took to really pursue this?
You know, I wouldn't, it sounds brave, but it happened over so many years that it was actually a pretty cautious way to do it. And I think that, you know, the aha moment didn't happen at one time. It happened over many times. And it was basically, you know, while I was sitting in a meeting and, you know, I would be not involved in whatever the person was talking about, and I would be sketching ideas for patterns. Or I would be thinking about what I was going to do when I went to the studio that night. I used to blow from like 6 to 9 p.m. And I realized that I was having way more fun daydreaming about glass than I was, you know, working and figuring out what was in the next software release. And I feel like I had this experience, you know, a couple hundred times over a number of years. And it was that experience over and over again and then kind of growing success in working with galleries, and then my work maturing and getting, more intricate and, more meticulously crafted. And, I felt that I was always, I'm kind of a striver. And so I was always, making better and better work. And I just felt like, wow, it is so much more fun to do glass than this, this being, the corporate world. And so I just kept thinking about, how do I do more of glass and less of consulting? And, my last year of consulting, I think I gave my client, which was Nest at the time, I gave them something like 10 hours a week because I just wanted to work in the studio. And so I would be in the studio designing pieces on conference calls, about marketing, corporate marketing stuff. And eventually I was like, I'm done with this. So it was very gradual.
Mm.
How long does it take to make a piece this size? And what does it cost?
It's done in so many different steps over a number of weeks that it's really hard. But, the answer, I'm asked this question a lot. And I think the answer there's two answers. One is, just like if you were to have, your appendix taken out, or any kind of a surgery, right? It took that surgeon maybe like 25 minutes to take out your appendix, or 45 minutes, but it took them 20 years to learn how to do it in half an hour. So, a piece like this probably takes me about 10 or 12 hours, whether it's pulling the cane, chopping up the cane, making the marini, cutting the marini, designing it, maybe it's 12 hours over many different days. But it took me 21 years of blowing glass in order to be able to do that in that amount of time. And there's also, there's a loss rate, right? Like not everyone turns out perfectly. Luckily, my success rate is 90% or so. But, sometimes they come out and they don't live, they crack. I am 100% successful or virtually 100% successful in getting them blown and in a kiln. But sometimes they come out and they crack, because of colors that don't want to live next to each other. Or maybe they went away too cold, or maybe the kiln malfunctions, or, who knows? But yeah, so there's a lot of, and also there's the hundreds of failures over the last 21 years in order to, be able to bring it to this.
David, we have a question from someone who's asking what sort of advice you would give to a young glass blower.
So I think watching other people, get in the studio as much as you can, get your hands on glass, and then pay really, really close attention. Because the glass gives you subtle cues all the time. Its color, the way it moves, all of these things inform what you can do with it, and gives you insight into what it can do at that given moment. Because one of the things that's super tricky about glass is that from 1 second to another, it behaves differently, right, as it cools. So, but if you pay really, really close attention, you can start to understand and predict that. So, definitely get your hands on glass. The other thing is watch people, and they don't need to be the best, because I've learned a ton from watching someone who, specializes in one thing, or is maybe even an intermediate glass blower when I was learning. And I would watch their successes, but I would also watch their failures. And I would try to understand why did something fail. And then I would probably annoy the crap out of them, because at the end of their slot, I might ask them that, oh, why did you do this? Or why did you do that? So I think asking questions is really, really helpful. I never had any real formal training, but most of my learning was from watching people and then trying things in the hot shop myself. But if you don't pay attention, and you try the same thing over and over again without understanding, the reason for the success or the failure that you've had, then you won't learn anything from it. So I even to this day, I feel like I'm always learning from the glass. It is a really, really tricky material, and you also need a ton of persistence. You really just, it's a little bit of banging your head against the wall in probably, the first 3 years. But if you learn something every time you bang your head against the wall, it will get better. And that's kind of the fun of it, is it's a really hard material. And I find it super rewarding that I can make kind of what I envision in my head. And that reward is kind of what propelled me forward.
I'm finding your advice synonymous with raising children. So thanks.
And hopefully you can't hear my 9-year-old upstairs having a play date. I just hear like all this banging on the ceiling. I don't know what's going on up there.
Yeah. The banging the head on the wall is oftentimes how I feel as a parent. So learn from it, learn by
Definitely.
doing. Yeah.
Persistence and patience, I guess, right?
Yes. Anyone else?
You didn't answer how much a piece this size would cost in a gallery.
Oh, this so this piece was 12,500. But they vary, right? It depends on the complexity and the scale. Yeah, there's a range. The simplest works, are 900. And the most complex are like our collaborative work with James. Those pieces are closer to 18,000.
Last call for questions before we wrap up. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. David, I've learned so much in just the last hour, not only about you, but about glass blowing in general. So thank you so much. Oh, we got another question. When did your career start to seriously take off as a glass blower?
It was really kind of gradual and consistent. I don't feel like there was, probably about 9 years ago when I went full time, right? When there was zero consulting distracting me. But it was really gradual and consistent. And I don't, there wasn't any inflection point really. But I work hard, because I have a business background, I also worked hard on the business side as well. And, working with galleries to, help get my work out there and help them understand it and share it with clients. And I think that's really an important part of building a career out of whatever it is that you love. You can't just stay in the hot shop and make stuff all the time. You've got to, make sure that your work gets out in the world and be comfortable sharing it.
Nice.
Have you ever done any flame working?
I've never done any flame working with Devereaux. Occasionally, this is actually a good example, this piece. Occasionally I'll flame work something that's going to be in blown work. And so if you look closely at this piece that's on the screen, you'll see there's kind of a ring of white cane and that encircles the center. And if you can see, that white cane turns a couple of corners. So occasionally I'll flame work some of the cane that goes into my pieces because I want it to turn a corner. And that's the only flame working I do. I've never done any, traditional Devereaux flame working.
Thank you. Well, again, as I was saying, thank you everyone for being here this morning, or maybe it's really, really early in the morning for some of you. I'm not sure where all of you are, but we thank you, and we hope that you will, if you're not familiar with Elder Gallery, that you will familiarize yourself with what we do. And I also wanted to let everyone know that we will send a listing of available works that we have of David's later on today to everyone who participated in this call. I included our contact information, but feel free to just wait for that email and respond to that directly as well. So again, thank you all, and we look forward to remaining in touch.
Yep, thanks everyone.
So
Thanks,
David.
Neil.
Thank you so much, David. It was great.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye. Have a
All
great
right,
day.
bye-bye.